Long before the birth of Palpatine, also known by his Sith name, Darth Sidious, there was already a Sith empire in the galaxy with Emperor Viscount at its head. Even then, they dreamed of superships. Super, if not in size, then certainly in power. When playing as a Republic commando, you will be required to blow up a Harrower-class dreadnought with an experimental supercannon, the Gauntlet. Sith Darth Mechis initiated the project at the Sunraiser station. The project was completed and put into production by the even more talented Colonel Rebus. He oversaw the development of many interesting things in the Empire. The Gauntlet had the unique ability to strike a ship even in hyperspace, where it was defenseless, and destroy it there. Often one single shot, one single hit was enough. Its range was large but not infinite. The cannon could hit anything within a single star system. When Republican intelligence learned that the Sith Empire already had such a ship, it was being tested and prepared for serial production, and this was on the eve of a new global war. That's when the military leadership of the Republic started to panic, which gradually turned into madness and hysteria. Supreme Commander of the Republican Democratic Armed Forces Rans was confident that if the Imperials created many such ships, then, quote, they will conquer the Republic in weeks. A massive joint operation was planned by the fleet forces, represented by the 5th Assault Fleet of the Republic under the command of Fleet Admiral Newman, and the Special Operations Forces under the overall command of General Elin Gaza. With heavy losses among the fleet and commandos, they still managed to destroy the Gauntlet from within. However, the attack on an Imperial ship in Imperial territory was a gross violation of the signed peace treaty. This and other mutual claims became one of the reasons for the start of the Second Great War. The Gauntlet was not produced serially, not being up to it, but the Sith Empire had other super ships. For example, the Doombringer, created on the basis of a Harrower-class battlecruiser. There was simply no other platform. The development was supervised by Moff Valian Pyron with fellow Moffs Dulles and Graham. In hyperspace, the Doombringer could not fire, but having on board an ancient analog of a super laser from the films called the Silencer, the ship could silence any Republican heavy cruiser or battleship like fish with dynamite. One shot and instant death. And if the reactor was strained hard and the power accumulated, it could destroy a small squadron of closely standing ships with one shot. Darth Nox, seeing this and being impressed, demanded that as many ships as possible be equipped with such super lasers, but they also needed corresponding reactors. Partly due to this, the Imperials so brazenly intruded on the planet Makeb, desiring to acquire Isotope 5 there. And they received it, but they could not build many carriers with the super laser, nor did they manage to do so in time, although they nevertheless assembled some. When repelling the imminent attack of the Empire, these superships did not particularly help. But in the next war against the Republic, they participated very well. Another supership of antiquity can be boldly named the Ascendant Spear, the flagship vessel of Sith Darth Carid, real name Kana Terid. She led the sphere of technology in the Dark Light. The Ascendant Spear did not possess a super laser. Its distinctiveness lay elsewhere. The ship represented the perfect union of man and machine. Darth Carid directly linked herself to the ship through bionic implants. Its sensors and scanners became her eyes and ears. Its turbolaser cannons and missile launchers became her hands. This, combined with the dark side of the Force, transformed an already formidable warship into something incredibly powerful and immensely fast. Navigation using the Force allowed for stunning hyperjump accuracy. Darth Carid's small mobile fleet annihilated entire Republican squadrons. One shot, and a Thranta-class corvette turned into a fireball. Another shot, and a Hammerhead-class cruiser was cleaved in two by lasers. The next salvo, and 30% of the shield of a heavy Valor-class cruiser evaporated. By the fourth shot, a hole the size of half a football field invariably appeared in the armored hull of the Valor-class cruiser. Such a powerful craft could be created by combining the technical genius of Sith scientists and the dark side of the Force, technology and magic. The Republicans chased this ship for a long time, but unfortunately for the Sith Empire, Sith overestimated their abilities and underestimated the persistence of the Republican Theron Shan and her former master Jedi Master Nos Dural, demonstrating both typical Sith carelessness and rare foolishness for Darth Carid. Along with the ship, she was killed in the Battle of Duro. The Republic did not lag behind the Empire in attempts to create their own superships. Specifically, the Republic constructed the super battleship, the Star of Coruscant, at least 4 kilometers in length, armed with hundreds of cannons, including especially powerful experimental weaponry. The Republicans designated it as a super dreadnought, a unique term not used for any other ship of ancient Republican construction. However, in the Battle of Hoth, in the year 3665, the Sith hit the ship, driving it into the atmosphere and eventually crashing the giant onto the surface of Hoth. But the ship's armor was so strong that it landed in one piece. Most of the crew, and much of the electronics and weaponry, managed to survive. Subsequently, one of the largest pirate groups in the galaxy, the White Moor, used the remnants of the Star of Coruscant as their city and fortress on the surface of Hoth. A splendid decision. The armor was extraordinarily thick, some guns still worked, and even some reactors continued to function. It was warm, cozy, and safe there. Also over Hoth, another experimental giant battled and perished, the battleship, the Vehement Sword. What was most remarkable about it was not the ship itself, but its armament, null cannons. However, it was not destined to become a mass-produced vessel, as the cannons were too expensive and the Republican government struggled to find funds for them. However, not every large war in Star Wars necessitated the creation of large ships. The longest stories in Star Wars, the Alsakan conflicts, rarely led to the emergence of super dreadnoughts with massive guns. But exceptions were battleships like the Cal-class battleships, whose design the peaceful Republic stole from the Kumari Empire after occupying all its planets. Distinct from their contemporaries, the 3-kilometer-long Cal-class battleships featured a massive and very powerful mass-driver cannon, almost the same 3 kilometers in length. The cannon was positioned along the entire length of the hull and could fire asteroids of suitable size as well as pre-stocked metal slugs. There was no need to stuff them with explosives, as any ordinary metal piece, traveling at near light speed and colliding with a planet, would mimic a nuclear bomb. While it was difficult to hit other ships with this cannon, targeting a planet was feasible. Incidentally, ship-borne siege mass drivers were one of the reasons for the advent of planetary defensive force fields, though not everyone could afford such financial expenditures. It would be interesting to know where these ships went later, at the most critical moments, when the Mandalorians showed up and began systematically occupying Republican planets. By the time of the final 17th Alsakan conflict, which started and ended in 3017 BBY, the Republic launched a capital ship that helped end the war swiftly. It did not look imposing, measuring only 2 kilometers in length, specifically 2,011 meters. Yet for its time it was a super battleship, very fast, very well armed, and a terror to all enemies. It was aptly named Invincible. Classified as a dreadnought class, or more precisely, a dreadnought at that time. As it aged, the ship was downgraded several classes, becoming a heavy cruiser. These ships fought on the side of the Republic during the New Sith Wars, which lasted almost 1,000 years. Moreover, there were also some super ships during the New Sith Wars, but unfortunately, there are no details. However, when the global war ended with the triumph of the Republic and the Jedi Order, the galaxy saw quite a bit of excitement. It was during this time that truly super battleships emerged, multi-kilometer monsters with thick armor, bristling with guns like a hedgehog with spines. Most are aware of the subsequent events, but it seems useful to provide some introductory information for better understanding the process. Immediately after the war, the Supreme Chancellor became Tarsus Valorum, a humanist, reformer, and very short-sighted politician. While the war raged on, the Galactic Republic was completely dominated by the Jedi Order, transforming the state into a militarized theocracy. At that time, only the Jedi held the position of Supreme Chancellors, led the armed forces, commanded intelligence, and so forth. The Galactic Senate became essentially a fiction, a mere facade. All key issues were decided by the Jedi High Council. Tarsus Valorum was the first non-Jedi Chancellor in several centuries. Naturally, throughout the war, the common mortal's distrust in the Jedi Order grew, especially in the last century. And this is putting it mildly. It was easy to understand those who wanted to kill the Jedi. Many blamed the Jedi for all their troubles, primarily for the war, from which in recent years trillions of humans and non-humans suffered and billions died. Although 1,000 years had passed, Many remembered that Darth Ruusan, who initiated the 1,000-year period of wars, was once a respected Jedi master. There were those who feared the Jedi dictatorship would continue, especially since the Jedi controlled the army and the fleet. However, the Jedi too were weary of wars, wishing to return to their roots. In the end, although with some resistance, the Jedi agreed to transfer power to common mortals without the Force. Wishing to reduce societal tension, Tarsus Valorum ordered the disbandment of the army and the fleet, depriving the Jedi of any possibility to seize power again through a coup d'etat. By the way, if you think that the Jedi are all positive characters and a coup is out of character for them, do not be deceived. The Contispex dynasty was overthrown by the Jedi through a coup d'etat in the distant past. Of course, Contispex was no better. They turned the Republic into a xenophobic totalitarian empire, but the fact remains. Many years later, after the Second Galactic Civil War, it was the Jedi who, with some support from secular figures, carried out a coup against the legitimate authority of Natasi Da'ala, Chief of State of the Galactic Federation of Free Alliances. Deprived of a unified armed force, the Republic lost all influence over its subjects, the states, members of the Republic. And after millennia of endless brawling interrupted by brief truces, many such contradictions had accumulated. Added to this was the threat of piracy. Highwaymen always appeared in embarrassing numbers during major wars. The new Sith Wars were no exception. Of course, Tarsus Valorum saw the problems, and together with the Senate, made some attempts to establish peace, mostly unsuccessful. First and foremost, he began distributing ships to regional states, members of the Republic ships that had fought under the common Republic banners against the Sith armadas just yesterday, as well as trophy ships of the Sith themselves. But, as always, those who were closer to the capital's trough received the freshest ships in large quantities. In many systems and sectors of the Republic, a wild arms race began. In addition to this, the Mandalorians at that time had a new Mandalore. A capable and efficient organizer, he began to build the Mandalorian state, independent of the Republic with robust industry and united as never before. Yet even without the Mandalorians, the Republican democracy had multiple issues. Something had to be done swiftly, as local wars greatly disrupted trade. Hence, Tarsus Valorum took measures to limit the size, speed, and power of warships. This entire initiative was named the Ruusan Reformation. From this point on, warships could not be longer than 600 meters. The speed of hyperdrives was restricted to 5th class, according to the standards of that time. By the era of the films, this would be equivalent to 8 to 10 the class speed. Thus, these vessels traveled very slowly. Another restriction was on navigation computers. Warships could only have maps for flights within their own state's territory. Departure beyond these bounds could only be executed via navigation beacons along pre-known routes. And all this, I remind you, with the speed of a tortoise. So conducting battles beyond one's state boundaries was exceedingly difficult, with all actions being highly predictable. Exceptions were made only for certain fringe worlds within the outer and middle rings, certain particularly dangerous regions where fighting pirates required proper warships rather than these limited vessels. However, representatives of these Republic subjects often had to practically fight their way through hostile Republican bureaucrats with suitcases of money and prove the necessity of having proper warships in numerous Senate committees, subcommittees, commissions, and so forth for years. It was essentially a bureaucratic, political, and corruption-laden quest that not everyone could complete without losing their sanity. Some tried to maintain the appearance of lawfulness, not wanting the Senate to impose sanctions on them, send patrols from the Judicial Department, or worse, sick their even less friendly neighbors on their supposedly aggressively and undemocratically armed state to enforce peace. To avoid all this, enormous, multi-kilometer, supposedly transport ships were built, unarmed and innocuous-looking for the time being, but designed to be quickly armed if necessary. Incidentally, this loophole in the Ruusan Reformation was later skillfully exploited by the Trade Federation when it built its ships, as formally, according to the paperwork, their immense vessels were merely transports. Republican authorities, even the rare supreme chancellors who wished to rectify things and impose order, invariably encountered systemic problems and indifference at all levels of power, as well as outright opposition between the peripheries and the center. Of course, not all regional rulers, including those on the fringes with the capacity for ship gigantomania, succeeded. Sometimes the pursuit of gigantomania led to a head-on collision with Republican sanctions, with very grim consequences for the economy and territorial integrity. Of course, not all members of the Republic tried to preserve the semblance of legality for their massive vessels. Industrially developed and wealthy regions of the galaxy, which also wielded significant influence in the Galactic Senate, did not respond to the demands of the Senate. They immediately began the construction of giant cruisers and battleships, ships of such proportions that the galaxy had not seen for several millennia. Among them, of course, were Corellia and Quat, especially Quat. In the Quat sector was the planetary system of the same name with the eponymous capital planet. The entire sector boasted magnificent industry, including shipbuilding, and in orbit around the capital planet was a ring of shipyards, the largest and most renowned shipyards in the entire galaxy, with colossal production capabilities. The corporation Quat Drive Yards was one of the largest, wealthiest, and thus most influential in the entire explored galaxy. They even had their own representation in the Senate, not counting the senators from Quat itself. The inhabitants of Quat always worked on a grand scale. All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. This famous quote from George Orwell's novella Animal Farm fits perfectly here. And so the inhabitants of Quat did not even think to adhere to any limitations on the size, power, and speed of warships, and no one could reproach or force them to disarm through power, although they occasionally limited the speeds of their ships. The corporation Quat Drive Yards was one of the largest taxpayers in the Republic. It was useless to pressure them through legal means, and forcibly disarming Quat by force of arms, well, no one would even try. The inhabitants of Quat kept their giant ships as part of the local defense fleet, the Quati sector forces. But they clearly flew in other squadrons of the state of Quat and in the corporation's own military fleet. As it is known, subsidiary companies of the corporation with factories and shipyards could be found in many corners of the galaxy. They had to be protected by something, including enormous battleships. Flouting Republican laws allowed the corporation Quat to maintain competency in the production of multi-kilometer super battleships over many centuries. This helped them greatly on the eve of the Clone Wars, during the war, and especially after the war, when Emperor Palpatine desired to acquire giant super ships in his military force, enormous dreadnoughts. The experience in the creation and operation of Praetors was also very useful in the development of the Imperator-class Star Destroyer. Other shipbuilding firms of the galaxy of those years, such as the Mon Calamari orbital shipyards, which did not have such experience, had to design their giants methodically and tediously through trial and error. For example, the New Republic designed and built their Viscount-class Star Defender very slowly, leisurely, and expensively by the engineers of Mon Calamari and Corellia. Although in the end, the New Republic fared very well. A 17-kilometer ship equipped with 5,000 guns, a hangar capable of housing 200 fighters and bombers, and 100 shuttles and landing craft, along with space to transport an entire army corps, complete with its full complement of artillery and armored vehicles. Imperial admirals, and later the warlords of the Yuuzhan Vong, were shocked by this. Some even doubted if the New Republic was capable of building such a vessel, let alone daring to do so. Only the officers from the Imperial remnants protested back then. So what exactly were these superships of Quat in the last centuries of the Galactic Republic's existence? Primarily, they were the enormous, for their time, Procurator-class Star Destroyers, and later the Praetor-class, built upon its design. Both were modestly referred to as battle cruisers. In reality, they were the largest and most powerful mass-produced battleships in the galaxy at the time. However, the galaxy did not yet have a unified system of classification for combat ships. As a result, regional governments would name their giant vessels as they saw fit. About 200 years before the Clone Wars, the Procurator appeared, a gigantic ship measuring 2,500 meters in length. It was first mentioned in the guidebook for Star Wars Attack of the Clones, Incredible Cross-Sections, Episode 2. It was merely mentioned and nothing more. No details were provided there. A similarly brief mention followed in the complete Star Wars encyclopedia. We only obtained some details from the remarkable guidebook, The Essential Guide to Warfare Star Wars, along with its supplements. The technical specifications of the Procurator have yet to be detailed. The history of the ship is also unclear. What is known is that the people of Quat built this beauty not only for themselves but also for several states that could afford to purchase such a massive battleship. The previously mentioned Praetor, a battleship 4 kilometers in length, appeared in the last decades of the Republic's existence and was intended to replace the outdated, by Quat standards, Procurator. Why did they make such a ship? Simply because they could. They had the finances. The shipyard's slipways allowed for it, and the design bureaus both wanted to and were capable of it. Though even the 2-century-old Procurator could still put up a fight against anyone. But for the people of Quat, it was never enough. In the case of the Praetor, the people of Quat again disregarded the existing limitations for ships in the rest of the Republic. Yes, unlike its predecessor, it is definitively known that Praetors were exported, sold to anyone who could afford to buy and maintain the 4-kilometer Colossus. And most importantly, who had enough influence to get the necessary permissions from the Senate and the senatorial committees, and a sufficient sum of money. And these sums were clearly much higher than the cost of the enormous battleship itself. The expenses were substantial. The ship was very expensive, as was its maintenance. The technical specifications of the Praetor have yet to be determined, and it is unlikely they will be developed soon, as they are absent both in the original Star Wars expanded universe and in the new canon where this ship also appears. There is not even an official appearance for it. Nevertheless, some history has been fabricated about the 4-kilometer behemoth, which is already pleasing. From the early days of the Clone Wars, the entire Quat sector was on the side of the Republic. Incidentally, when the not yet fully aged Palpatine commissioned the development and production of the Venators, and later the Imperators, he seriously considered the Procurators and the Praetors. However, these ships were too expensive and took a long time to build. The future ruler of the galaxy wanted ships quickly and in large numbers. When the Clone Wars began, the defensive fleet of Quat was hastily mobilized for war. But the inhabitants of Quat preferred to wait for victory on the home front, holding back their beloved fleet in their native sector for its protection. Moreover, these ships were equipped with additional armor and a larger number of guns. For example, the battleship named the Quaestor, evidently not alone but at the head of a squadron, conducted long-range raids into the territory of the Confederacy of Independent Systems. The Separatists were frightened, wondering what to do with it, especially when the Quaestor, accompanied by a support group, appeared in the orbit of the planet Pamont, in the eponymous planetary system of the Calamari sector in the Outer Rim. It was there that the legendary ship, the Invisible Hand, the terrifying flagship of General Grievous, and the most powerful airborne enemy of the Separatist fleet, was built. However, the most powerful after the Subjugator-class heavy cruiser, of course. Although not only the Invisible Hand was built there, all, or almost all, Providence-class carrier-destroyers launched from the Pamont shipyards. These were very powerful and respectable ships that caused many problems for the Republic, and later for the Empire. Shortly before the battle over Coruscant, the squadron headed towards the Separatists. A firefight began, and hundreds of torpedoes severely damaged the Quaestor and its hyperdrive, causing the ship to make a sudden, accidental, and uncontrolled jump into hyperspace, despite the gravity shadow of a celestial body that usually prevents such jumps. The ship crashed into a planet, piercing it to its core. As a result, the super battleship evaporated, as if it had never existed. The planet was cracked, but did not explode, and the local inhabitants perished. A handful of lucky individuals who somehow survived the cataclysm hurried to escape the dying, radiation-soaked planet. Naturally, the Quaestor was not the only Praetor in Republic service. Another known ship of this class under the Republic banners bore the name A Battalion. It was the flagship of a large naval formation led by Admiral Adar Talon. Adar, a brilliant tactician and strategist of space warfare, began his military service in the Republican fleet later serving with distinction in the Imperial fleet for several years, before joining the Rebel Alliance and concluding his service in the fleet of the New Republic. The fleet under his command was part of the 12th Sector Army, responsible for military operations in the Maldrud sector. Immediately after the war, Adar Talon was one of the admirals entrusted with the honorable mission of eliminating the remaining forces of the Confederacy of Independent Systems who refused to surrender. The Battleship, a battalion under Adar Talon's command, played a crucial role in the campaign against the Separatists, led by former senator and staunch supporter of the separatist movement, Senator Tunbuk-Tura. This campaign later became known as the Psi-Mirthian insurrection, named after the planet Psi-Mirth, also known as Farbarseg. This planet is one of the key worlds in the Jospro sector of the Outer Rim, and is the home planet of Senator Tunbuk-Tura. Nearby is a section of the Perlemian trade route, one of the most important hyperspace routes in the galaxy. It was urgent to return these lands under the control of the invisible hand of the corrupted Emperor and his newly minted apprentice. Adar Talon, commanding from aboard the battalion, achieved a series of impressive victories. The most significant and known to us were 4 battles: the battle on Metalorn, Diado, and the siege of the capital planet Psi-Mirth. The Separatists were greatly outraged by the fervor of the now Imperial and recently Republican military forces. The final and decisive battle of the campaign was the Siege of Traceman. The super battleship, a battalion, almost single-handedly destroyed the Separatist fleet, including in a duel situation, where it annihilated the Separatist flagship known as the Defiance's Banner. Although this was not just the merit of the ship and its excellent crew, it was primarily the merit of Adar Talon himself, who managed to trap the Separatist fleet. The leader of the remnant, Tunbuk-Tura, perished with her ship, as was befitting a commander. Whether her death was heroic, history remains silent. Following this, Adar Talon was both awarded and named a hero of the Empire. However, Adar Talon began to grow disillusioned with the Galactic Empire, to which he had sworn allegiance only a year prior. While the vast majority of the population admired Palpatine, revered as the savior of the galaxy, a remedy for political illnesses and social ruin, Adar saw a dictator in the Emperor, witnessed the war crimes of the Empire, and noticed much more that the average person did not know or did not want to know. Adar began to openly speak out against the Imperial New Order, against the militarization of the state, against the restriction of freedom of speech, and which was absolutely unacceptable, against the ruler of the galaxy himself. Palpatine could no longer secretly arrest and imprison the Admiral. He himself had proclaimed him a hero of the Empire, making him a very noticeable figure. Adar, for his part, understood that he could not rise against the young Empire and overthrow the Emperor on his own. He lacked the strength and supporters. He was also a smart guy, and knew that if they couldn't arrest or openly eliminate him, they could quietly destroy him, making it look like an accident. Specialists and mercenaries were in abundance during Palpatine's time as Supreme Chancellor. Thus, not waiting for the Emperor's assassins to kill him, Adar decided to simulate his own death. An opportunity presented itself sometime after his grand victory, when the celebrated Admiral and his flagship super battleship were assigned to the sector fleet of the Dalchon sector, located in the Outer Rim territories. You might be wondering, why am I telling you all this? The video is about ships after all. Well, the heroic battleship, a battalion, played the leading role in Adar Talon's plan. Adar had a friend named Quist. During the Clone Wars they served together, and now Quist had become a pirate. One of the many pirates in the Dalchon sector. That's actually why Adar was assigned there, to drive the pirates out. Adar contacted his friend and asked for a favor. Then, the Admiral acquired a cargo ship and left it drifting in a rarely visited region of space. He asked Quist and his band to stage an attack on the ship. The ship sent out an SOS signal. Meanwhile, a battalion had a minimal crew. Adar took only those he could trust. The battleship urgently flew to rescue the transport vessel. There, on the spot, the crew of a battalion transferred to the cargo ship, after which the pirates destroyed the battleship, having first, of course, looted it. Even the Emperor believed that his critic had died. No one bothered to think or check how pirates could have managed to destroy a super battleship, especially with such a well-trained crew. Evidently, Palpatine very much wanted to believe that Adar was no longer alive. An official memorial service was held, with pompous speeches from the tribunes in memory of the hero. Meanwhile, the transport ship delivered the deserters to Tatooine. In one way or another, Adar managed not only to survive, but also to lay low, evading the Empire and the tyrannical Emperor. He remained hidden there until the emergence of the Rebel Alliance. But that's not all about the ships of this class. Scavengers from the Rebel Alliance, who were extracting valuable parts and damaged ships for the resistance movement from ship graveyards and battle sites, once discovered an abandoned, nameless Republican Praetor. There are no details, but apparently the ship was heavily damaged in battle, and it was decided to abandon it. Then in the chaos of the war, the dead island of the battleship was simply forgotten. They inspected the 4-kilometer giant and found a working reactor, a huge reactor, which they delivered to their main base on the planet Hoth Echo Base. This reactor used to power the entire ship. Naturally, its capacity was more than sufficient for a large but still ground-based base, where there was no need to power a hyperdrive and massive ion engines. The reactor powered not only the equipment but also partially fed energy to the planetary shields. Additionally, the ion cannon, the V-150 Planet Defender, was sustained by it. Typically, the reactors for this weapon are located 50 meters underground, but the reactor for this cannon was buried at a depth of a full kilometer. A large reactor at a depth of 1 kilometer? This required them to drill through a glacier and excavate through frozen rocky soil. The efforts paid off. When Vader's Imperial Death Squadron appeared in orbit of Hoth, the deeply buried reactor prevented the Imperials from destroying the cannon and quickly taking out the shield projectors. They had to land troops, and the well-positioned V-150 cannon, firing from under the cover of the planetary deflector, prevented Imperial ships from blocking the rebels' escape to orbit. They also failed to intercept the hyperspace vector. Thanks to this, many rebel warships, transport vessels, and fighters with bombers managed to slip away. The only Imperial-class Star Destroyer that attempted to intercept was temporarily disabled by a series of ion hits. Such a powerful cannon, especially one powered by such a reactor, can disable anything. This Imperial-class Star Destroyer was named Tyrant. Interestingly, the battleship that nearly killed the heroes escaping from the planet Uprising later ended up in the hands of the very same Uprising. This happened 4.5 years later. Leia Organa then renamed the trophy to Rebel Dream. There, Leia received an embassy and visited other planets. Later the ship was recaptured by the Imperials. Then it was once again seized by the Republicans, returning to the Praetor. The very successful use of the ship in a global war did not go unnoticed by the Galactic Empire's General Staff and Palpatine. The Emperor demanded to do something similar but more armed, more armored, and improved. The residents of Quat already had many upgrades for the ship, and a wealth of combat experience. The Praetor Mark II class battlecruiser appeared in the early years of the Galactic Empire. Fortunately, this time we have the ship's tactical and technical characteristics. The Praetor significantly increased in size. Although the encyclopedia, The Essential Guide to Warfare, states the length of the ship as 4,800 meters, other sources indicate that the Praetor II class was, quote, 5 times longer than an Imperial-class Star Destroyer. That is 8,000 meters, 8 kilometers. Most likely 8 kilometers is a typo. They are very rare, but they do appear in official sources. Usually they are corrected quickly or not so quickly, calling it retcon and reporting it separately. But in this case, the official sources are silent. Why do I consider it a typo? Because if the ship was 8 kilometers long, its armament inventory is very modest, and it carried the following arsenal: 64 gun turrets with heavy turbo lasers, totaling 240 turbo lasers, 42 gun turrets with medium turbo lasers, totaling 80 guns, 10 twin gun turrets with long-range heavy ion cannons, totaling 20 guns, 30 twin gun turrets with regular ion cannons, totaling 60 pieces, and 10 tractor beam projectors. Thus, excluding the tractor beams, the ship carried as many as 400 very powerful guns. The ship's firepower was further augmented by a notable air group, comprising 120 fighters and bombers equivalent to 10 squadrons. Additionally, the hangar had space for cargo and passenger shuttles, as well as landing barges. Up to 14,000 troops could comfortably be accommodated on board. For a long time, many have pondered that if landing craft and shuttles were removed from the hangar and replaced with additional fighters and bombers, transforming the battleship into a carrier as well, the air group could theoretically be increased by about 150. 200 units and 300 fighters and bombers would be truly powerful. But this is not certain. The ship was run by a crew of several tens of thousands of people. The exact number is unknown. Only the maximum crew capacity of the ship is mentioned, 109,000, a whole flying city. But the ship was also very expensive, costing a whopping 700 million credits. For comparison, an Imperial-class Star Destroyer cost 150 million, 4.5 times cheaper, and a Venator 59 million. A Victory-class Star Destroyer 57 million, which is 12 times cheaper. Judiciously reasoning, they decided that it was better for the fleet to have more ships of smaller size than a few hundred of such giants. Moreover, the Imperial-class and Victory-class were more versatile battleships. Therefore, in the end, the Imperial fleet was handed just a few second-generation Praetors, and the order for the rest was simply cancelled. Not knowing what to do with them, the High Command stuffed the battleships into sector fleets, protecting key Imperial worlds and strategically important regions. It was intended to use the upgraded Praetors only for particularly large battles and for special missions as part of raiding squadrons in deep space. Fortunately, the fuel autonomy of 3 years allowed the ship to operate independently of supply bases. An example of the latter can be provided by the Praetor named Helmsman, the flagship of Admiral Mills Gill. Incidentally, this was the first Praetor to appear in Star Wars. This happened back in the 60th issue of the main comic series simply named Star Wars. Other Star Wars comics did not exist at that time. Issue number 60 went to print on March 16, 1982. Yes, 1982, when Star Wars was represented by only 2 films, the 4th and 5th episodes. The squadron led by the Helmsman was supposed to bring to Coruscant a creature called a Teasel, also known as Screamer. This strange-looking being was capable of functioning as a live relay, an amplifier of hyperspace communication. With its help, the Imperials wanted to improve the coordination of their fleet. It's good to have a communication link that cannot be blocked or intercepted, but the plan failed. The rebels intervened. We know of another Praetor II class, formerly known as the Thalassa. It belonged to Admiral Sandor Delvardis's fleet. He was poisoned by Natasi Dala because Delvardis did not want to give up his power over his Imperial remnant. And he did not want Imperial unity. He wanted to go further, to reign and to own everything, although his attempts to rule were not very successful. A few years before this fateful encounter with her, Delvardis's forces suffered a series of unpleasant defeats. In particular, the battleship, the Thalassa, was lost. This happened during the siege of the imperial planet Murja by the fleet and army of the New Republic. It is in the Inner Rim, in Grid Square L15. The exact circumstances of Thalassa's demise are not reported. Most likely, the ship tried to lift the blockade of the planet by destroying or forcing the besieging New Republic squadron to retreat. But it failed. Thalassa perished in battle. At least one Praetor survived until the appearance of the resurrected Emperor Palpatine and was used by him, nearly immortal, in his grand military campaign against the New Republic. It is unknown how many Praetors the Imperials managed to construct in total. Probably no more than 10 ships, because shortly after the start of Praetor II class construction, the project was abandoned. As main battleships, the core of the fleet was more than adequately composed of Imperial-class Star Destroyers and some rare subtypes, such as the Star Destroyers of the Tector-class or the Gladiator-class, and the niche of super battleships was already being rapidly filled by dreadnoughts of the Bellator-class, the Asserter-class, and the Mandator III class dreadnought. Familiar names? Perhaps not. As it turned out, most fans are aware of ships in the Executor-class, the Eclipse-class, and sometimes the Sovereign-class. Fewer people know of the Bellator-class, the Asserter-class, or the Retribution. These ships are fascinating, and we shall now discuss them. In this unhurried manner, we have finally arrived from merely large line ships to the supergiants, the super battleships, the dreadnoughts. Let us start, of course, with the ships that appeared first. These were the ships of the Mandator class, specifically the Mandator, but already in the 4 class, which you saw in Episode 8. In the film, according to the so-called new canon, there are no official images of the Mandator at all. Most likely, the ship resembled the Bellator, as when creating this dreadnought, the designers based it on the design of the Mandator. The first dreadnought of the Mandator class appeared in the second year BBY, coming into existence just 20 years before the beginning of the Clone Wars. Why do I call it a dreadnought, and not a battlecruiser or battleship? The fact is that already during this turbulent period, the bright minds in the galaxy's highest military, academic, and scientific institution on Anaxes devised the famous classification system for warships. Warships were divided based on their purpose and size, length, width, volume of space, and the like. Thus, all vessels over 200 meters were considered corvettes and gunboats. From 200 to 400 meters were frigates and light cruisers. From 400 to 600 meters were cruisers. From 600 meters to 1 kilometer were heavy cruisers, and so on. Anything over 5 kilometers in length was designated as dreadnoughts, regardless of their intended battlefield role. However, typically, such massive ships were only battleships. Aircraft carriers of this size were not produced. This was a significant oversight in Star Wars. For instance, the famous flagship of Darth Vader, the Executor, can be referred to as both a dreadnought and a star destroyer. More precisely as a superstar destroyer, or SSD, and so the Mandator. Since the launch of the first, the Mandator from the shipyards in 42 BBY, until the beginning of the Clone Wars, the inhabitants of Quat managed to build and commission only 7 of these 8-kilometer giants. 3 guarded the home sector of Quat as part of the local defense fleet, and the remaining 4 were deployed one by one to the fleets of the Humbarine, Alsaka, Ixtlar, and Azure sectors. These sectors are all in the core worlds, very well located, highly developed, with a high standard of living, excellent industry and science, hence very wealthy and influential. Even in the later Republican period, the core worlds were relatively safe. There were almost no pirates. Having a superstar destroyer was necessary to show the neighboring galaxies how rich you were, and at the same time, to keep these neighbors from coveting your territories. The Confederacy of Independent Systems did reach the Alsaka and Azure sectors, but most certainly they reached the Humbarine sector. In this region, the entire war saw intense struggles for the hearts and minds of the local elites and the general population, along with its territories with manufacturing capabilities. As it had many factories and plants, the planets of this sector changed hands throughout the war. In some places, they peacefully swore allegiance, either to the Republic or to the Confederacy. In other cases, there were coups or classic battles. The Grand Army of the Republic could not afford to lose this strategically important sector, sending significant forces to assist the regional troops. The Mandator of Humbarine fought side by side with other battleships purchased from Quat before the war. But that did not help. All the significant planets of the sector were ravaged, devastated by war, or even destroyed. The sector's capital, named Humbarine, suffered the most. After a prolonged standoff, General Grievous destroyed the planet by unleashing a massive orbital bombardment on Humbarine. The planet almost split. Its core became unstable. Almost all the inhabitants perished. Tens of billions of humans and non-humans. Humbarine was not just a planet, it was an ecumenopolis, a planet entirely encompassed by a single city like Coruscant, Taris, or Nar Shaddaa. The Mandator, once purchased by the local government to protect the capital, failed in its task. In the end, everyone lost. The war swept through the entire sector like a steamroller, drastically reducing the strategic value of the region. Both the Republic and the Confederacy, though not immediately, lost interest in Humbarine. Additionally, the emergence of the brain plague in the region soon after, which killed billions of humans and other races, compounded the devastation. The luckiest among them were the 3 Mandator-class dreadnoughts that remained in the defensive fleet of Quat. They survived the war. But even Grievous did not have the audacity or foolishness to venture into that inhospitable place to attack the well-armed and very numerous armada of Quat, which included plenty of dreadnoughts. and simply large cruisers and battleships. All the very best was in the Quat system, including the Mandator II class, already in existence by that time. It is unknown whether they were built by order of the Old Republic or if it was the personal initiative of Quat Corporation. Most likely, it was Quat's initiative, as the development of the second, improved generation of the Mandator began after Quat's break with the Old Federation and the Techno-Union. Hence, very intelligent people resided on Quat. They managed to build an industrial empire and maintain it for millennia. On Quat, they understood that war was approaching, a great war. Before the war, in relatively peaceful times, the Mandator II was built exclusively for Quat's defensive fleet, and as soon as the war erupted, Quat was already prepared for it and awaited military orders. Prepared, unlike much of the galaxy, to which war came as an unexpected shock for which they were not well prepared. What did the Mandator II represent? Although this mighty 8-kilometer-long dreadnought is now part of the new canon, having been briefly mentioned in the Complete Vehicles Guide published in 2018, there are no technical specifications or descriptions available there, except that the peculiar thesis from the expanded universe was repeated, stating that one Mandator allegedly matched the power of 1,000 separatist Viscount-class ships. Undoubtedly, the Viscount was not a masterpiece of shipbuilding, and even despite its size, it was far from the best ship in the Confederacy fleet. Nevertheless, it was quite a combat ship. When I first saw the phrase about 1,000 Viscounts in the ancient, magnificent guide, Star Wars, Revenge of the Sith Incredible Cross-Sections, I considered it a typo, but no, for some reason, this was repeated in the new canon. Even if the Mandator II is very well armed and indeed enormous, I seriously doubt it could survive a simultaneous encounter with even 100 Viscounts, let alone 50. Republic admirals really liked this dreadnought. It is not for nothing that even Palpatine took notice of this ship after ascending to the throne, ordering an improved version from Quat. More powerful, better armed, with stronger and thicker armor, and a third larger in size. The new ship was simply named the Mandator III, or the Mandator III-class dreadnought. But the enormous ship had no one to fight. At the time of its emergence, the rebel movement did not yet pose a significant threat. They also had few large ships, and no massive battleships at all. Threats from uncharted regions were easily and confidently handled by standard Imperial-class star destroyers, and the Vong had not yet appeared. Palpatine, also known as Darth Sidious, was a cruel and authoritative despot, but he desired to see the galaxy as peaceful and safe. Yes, it sounds a bit strange. But Palpatine ultimately strove for peace as he envisioned it. He sought power and aimed to rule using the principle of stick and carrot. Of course, the ambition to unite the galaxy is a highly ambitious and nearly unattainable goal. But Palpatine steadfastly pursued it throughout his life, disregarding risks, ready for any sacrifices, compromises with conscience and morality, cunning and dangers. But, as we know, everything went awry. The plan to protect the galaxy failed with the help of the Rebel Alliance, whose leaders were unaware that the Vong would soon arrive in the galaxy. Bringing equality and causing fraternity, the New Republic so reduced the total military potential of all participants in the process that the Vong arrived in a significantly weakened galaxy. Regarding military matters, Palpatine, of course, was a lover of gigantomania, but he built a huge fleet and super battleships not just for show. The militarization of the Empire was necessary to withstand the coming onslaught of the Yuuzhan Vong. If you happen to be unfamiliar with this topic, I recommend checking out the book The Essential Guide to Warfare. Palpatine knew about the Vong, and he was not the only one. He knew and prepared the galaxy for their arrival, ready to repel them as soon as they appeared. Most of the Mandator III class were moved into reserve, and few continued to serve in the fleet. They were rarer than rain on Tatooine. Hence, you would be exceptionally lucky to see even one of the 3 or 2 class, the Mandators. After the Endor disaster, everyone against everyone format squabble began. Imperial governors and admirals tore into each other's throats with fury and ferocity. This became known as the Imperial Civil War, which occurred concurrently with the Galactic Civil War. In this carnage, the Mandators did not remain on the sidelines. We know the names of 2 ships of this class, and notably, one of them did not die from the New Republic's guns, but during a battle between the Imperials. The Aculeus dreadnought perished in 10 ABY in combat against numerous squadrons of autofighters, a drone version of TIE fighters which, like a swarm of mosquitoes, descended in a suicidal attack on the cumbersome super battleship. The Panthac dreadnought also died in battle, but in a battle with the New Republic. This occurred during the grand military campaign of the reborn Emperor Palpatine against the New Republic. The Panthac was part of one of 3 fleets under the command of Admiral Feyet Kize, who held his flag on yet another super battleship, the Superstar Destroyer, the Whelm of the Executor-class star. And although we will still get to the Executor, since the Whelm was mentioned, a few words must be said about it. The Whelm was a very worthy ship with a most worthy commander. Admiral Feyet Kize, in previous years, still holding the rank of captain, crushed rebel squadrons, intercepted and destroyed transport convoys. For his services to the motherland, he was honored to become the commander of the Empire. This was the name borne by the first Imperial II-class star destroyer, a ship with magnificent shields and equipped with the most advanced electronics. In the fleet, it was said that Kize was allowed to personally choose his crew. You understand, only the best could be honored with such a privilege. Anyway, the crew of the Empire consisted of the best of the best. When Kize was promoted in rank and position, becoming the commander of the Whelm, he took the elite crew with him to the new ship. Moreover, Kize became one of the senior officers of the First Sector Army, also known as the Azure Hammer. The headquarters of the First Sector Army was located on Anaxes, a powerful fortress planet. Admiral Feyet Kize was a true Imperial and selected corresponding crews. The army under his command managed to hold several sectors in the core worlds without any problems. Even when the enormous fleet and army of the New Republic captured the galactic capital Coruscant and nearby worlds in 6 ABY, they couldn't capture Anaxes. To be exact, Admiral Feyet Kize defended it with the guns of the super battleship. But 2 years later, the resurrected Emperor Palpatine, having already recovered on Bis in a clone body, and gathered a new large army to reclaim his empire, secretly contacted the worthy Admiral. To bring order, one needed competent commanders for a mighty army, and Admiral Feyet Kize was one of them. He flew to his lord not empty-handed. He took with him the flagship of his fleet, the superstar destroyer, the Whelm. In his place he left his deputy Admiral Ostid Vermis. But this time the wise Admiral turned out to be not so wise, choosing a cowardly fool for the post who, instead of fighting to the last drop of blood, capitulated, surrendering the strategically important region to the New Republic. When Emperor Palpatine's grand military campaign to reclaim the galaxy began, Admiral Feyet Kize and his The Whelm fought in the front lines, leading 3 major fleets. They swiftly recaptured the core worlds. The Admiral and his flagship were halted only at the battle above Alsakan in Grid Square L9. The renowned Admiral perished along with his ship. Mandator IV-class warship dreadnoughts did not exist in the original Star Wars, but the Mandator IV is in the so-called New Canon, first appearing in the very strange 8th episode of the new trilogy. The Mandator IV, unlike its predecessors, transformed from a battleship into a siege ship. Its main caliber was 2 very powerful orbital autoguns, capable of piercing planetary shields and demolishing entire cities with a single shot. No other serious caliber weapon was introduced on the ship. The entire ship was essentially a base for these 2 guns. The rest of the weaponry was limited to light laser cannons for shooting down fighters and bombers, along with a few tractor beams to assist in aiming them. However, as you may recall, even those guns failed to help the siege behemoth deal with a single fighter piloted by the exceptionally agile, brazen, and skillful Poe Dameron. Hence, the primary role in the ship's defense fell to the deck fighters, several squadrons of which nested in the vast hangars of the supervessel and which might have never taken off in time if not for Hux. The Mandator IV had a length of 7,700 meters, a width of 4,120 meters, and a height of 770 meters. A colossal vessel that required a crew of 193,000 officers and sailors to operate. Naturally, this number represents the maximum crew. Unfortunately, the number of minimally required crew members is not reported. Additionally, the siege dreadnought housed 22,000 stormtroopers on board. They were to disembark on the planet after the orbital bombardment by the Mandator's guns to finish off anything that survived the bombardment. However, the Mandator IV was not only capable of planet bombings, but could also threaten enemy ships with its guns, as seen in the battle over the planet Dakar in Episode 8. The dreadnought Fulminatrix, which participated in the battle, aimed its barrels at the flagship cruiser of the Resistance, the Radis, but did not get a chance to fire. The ship was destroyed by a single Resistance bomber that miraculously broke through. Everything could have been different if not for Armitage Hux. If Hux had acted according to the regulations and relevant instructions, commanded to launch a fighter immediately after his ships emerged from hyperspace, and immediately ordered to cover the vital ship of the squadron with one of the Star Destroyers. Fortunately, it was not the only siege dreadnought in the First Order's fleet. There was at least one more ship of that class. It participated in the siege of the planet Tanuna, home to the insectoid race of the same name. Although it is difficult to call it a siege, more of an extermination and destruction. Hux then ordered the planet to be incinerated by orbital bombardment, which was immediately carried out. As already mentioned, the Mandator itself was not only a successful project, but also significantly influenced the creation of our next protagonist, the Bellator-class Star Destroyer. The history of this ship's appearance in the Star Wars universe is quite curious. Let me start with that story. It all began in the distant year of 1992. That year, a series of comics titled Dark Empire was sent to print. Back then, few could have guessed what a significant role the strangely drawn comics would play for the entire Star Wars franchise. Dark Empire, just like the trilogy about Grand Admiral Thrawn, became a powerful foundation upon which the majestic castle of the expanded universe was built, which we all so passionately love. Many works concerning the post-Endor period were based on the Dark Empire comics and frequently referred to the events occurring at that time. Knowing this, the authors of this comic series would have likely approached it more seriously in an illustrative sense. In 2016, the handbook Led by Example was released, adhering to the new canon where the Bellator was mentioned. Thus, the ship is 100% canonical in both the new canon and the expanded universe. The Bellator-class dreadnought looks magnificent. Its length is 7,200 meters. The armament for the ship consists of 16 heavy dual-turbo lasers, 48 quad-heavy turbo lasers, 40 octuple barbette heavy turbo lasers, 14 quad-heavy ion cannons, 108 strategic missile tubes, 288 light missile tubes grouped into launchers of 24 tubes each, 142 medium quad turbo lasers, and 1568 light quad weapons. In total, this sums up to 2310 barrels, and 396 additional, equally daunting locations from which missiles can be launched. However, the Mandator III was better armed. Because, as strange as it may sound, in creating this super dreadnought, the inhabitants of Quat aimed to make it faster than other giants of their construction. Unfortunately, there is no information on the hangar capacity of the Bellator. Most likely it housed at least 20 squadrons of fighters and bombers. The engineers of Quat designed all this magnificence based on the experience of creating, producing, and operating the Mandators I class and II class. They launched them into production immediately and without hesitation. The Bellators naturally became the flagship ships of the sectorial fleets. Some number, likely the majority of the constructed the Bellators, were sent to fleet reserve bases in the core of the galaxy, near the planet Bis. It was there that the Emperor Palpatine, resurrected in a clone body, later gathered his armada to reclaim the galaxy. And we do not know how well or poorly the Bellators fought against the fleets of the New Republic. Personally, I would very much like to command this behemoth under whatever flag it flew. Speaking of flags and emblems, at least one, the Bellator was captured by the New Republic and subsequently used against the Imperial forces for its intended purpose. It is also known that some of these super dreadnoughts ended up in the fleets of the Imperial remnants after the final death of Emperor Palpatine. Not only the New Republic, but many Imperials were glad of Palpatine's death. Primarily, the super dreadnoughts, of course, went to the largest remnant with its capital on the planet Bastion. In fairness, it should be noted that the books of this period do not specify which class the super dreadnoughts at Bastion were, or how many of them flew under the Empire's banner. We only know that this ship or ships existed and was smaller than the Executor. It could very well have been not the Bastion, but its older brother, the Asserter, about which I will now tell you. The story of the monstrous beauty's appearance in Star Wars is exactly the same as that of the Bellator, almost identical. The name, the Asserter, translates from Latin as Defender, Advocate, Liberator. This was the title given to the representative of the accused who aided in their defense in the courtroom. Simply put, a lawyer. The ship emerged from Palpatine's same passion for gigantism, which gave birth to the Mandator III, the Bellator, and several other projects. This ship was supposed to become, and did become, the intermediate link between the Bellators and the Executors. The length of the Asserter is 15 kilometers, 15,000 meters. Many Earth cities are smaller, and the population on the Asserter is corresponding. Full crew of 125,000 officers and sailors, plus 20,000 soldiers with armored vehicles and artillery. Typically, these were stormtroopers. Overall, the Asserter was armed with 20 port and 20 starboard quad heavy turbo-laser batteries, 15 port and 15 starboard quad battleship ion cannon batteries, and 10 dorsal twin heavy turbo-lasers. Additionally, there were 10 forward, 10 port, and 10 starboard quad light turbo-laser batteries. 20 ventral twin battleship ion cannon batteries were also placed, along with 10 port and 10 starboard dorsal medium ion cannons and 20 heavy tractor beam projectors. There were also 20 forward, 20 port, and 20 starboard turret-mounted quad laser cannons in company with 30 forward, 30 port, and 30 starboard concussion missile launchers. By the way, tractor beams were very lacking in the younger brother of the Asserter, the Bellator-class dreadnought. However, what the Asserter itself lacks is light anti-aircraft guns. Yes, the dreadnought has a hangar that can comfortably accommodate 120 fighters and bombers, along with dozens of shuttles, light transports, repair bots, and landing craft. But 120 fighters are merely 10 squadrons. This, along with the number of anti-aircraft guns, is clearly not enough for the complete protection of such a giant from swarms of enemy bombers and torpedo boats. But it's not a big deal. Super battleships rarely roam alone. Usually they are accompanied by an escort of dozens of warships and supply vessels, among which there is certainly a place for a carrier and corvettes with frigates carrying enough light guns to provide reliable flank cover for the Asserter, while the dreadnought's guns pulverize anything from an enemy squadron to an entire planet. The Asserters, like the Bellators and the Mandators, were typically flagship vessels of large sectoral fleets. They were given the honorable role of a flying headquarters. And to better handle this task, the ship was equipped with an unimaginable amount of various sensors, scanners, detectors, and very powerful hyperspace communication systems and electronic warfare means. The Asserters rarely engaged in battle. The enemies of the Empire, seeing this giant, preferred to surrender or flee if there was such an opportunity. Fortunately for the enemies of the Empire, the Asserter did not fly very quickly, having a primary hyperdrive of Class 2 and a backup of Class 12. By the way, most Imperial Star Destroyers also had a primary hyperdrive of Class 2, but a backup hyperdrive of Class 8. Unfortunately for the Imperial Treasury, the Assertor was slightly expensive, 1,100,000,000 credits. However, if you look at the cost of an Imperial-class Star Destroyer, which ranged from 130 to 150 million, it turns out it's not that much. Although, if compared to the cost of a Venator, one such ship once cost the Republic 59 million. One Asserter cost as much as 18.5 Venators. However, if you pit 19 Venators in battle against a single Asserter, the Venators would likely lose, though their fighter groups would pose a serious problem for the Imperial monster. In short, if you want a peaceful and quiet service, sign up for the Asserters. You are unlikely to ever see war. Well, unless you choose to serve during the post-Endor period, when the Asserters had to join the fight as part of the fleets of the Imperial Remnant and in the fleet of the same immortal Palpatine, that is, the resurrected Emperor, after whose death the surviving Asserters were dismantled as remembrances by the surviving Imperial commanders, mostly by the largest remnant on Bastion, which I have already mentioned. We know the names of 3 Asserter-class super battleships. First and foremost, of course, was the lead ship of the series, bearing the very predictable name, the Asserter. In the distant galaxy, as in the real world, the name of the lead ship of a series often coincides with the name of its class. But apart from the beautiful name, nothing is known about this ship. The second dreadnought in the series was the ship with an even more resounding name, the Empire's Wrath. It was also commissioned before BBY, before the destruction of the first Death Star, when it seemed that the Imperial hegemony was unchallenged. Again, nothing is known about the Empire's Wrath. Well, apart from the official drawing by Ansel Xiao, where the super battleship is executing the base Delta Zero order. Under this code order, let me remind you, lies the usual burning of the entire surface of a planet. The same terror could be orchestrated by the even larger Imperial ship, the Vengeance-class Dreadnought. Although the first ship in the series, also bearing that name, was by no means a combat vessel. Huge, mysterious, and frightening, these epithets fit this spaceship perfectly. The Vengeance Dreadnought was built at the personal request of the Dark Jedi Jarek, who served Emperor Palpatine. The very presence of the Dreadnought clearly proves the Emperor's special favor towards the Dark Jedi. Even Kranal Blackhole was not honored with having his own unique ship, satisfied with an individually modified Imperial-class Star Destroyer and his own legion of special stormtroopers to boot. The ship's name was not chosen by chance. The Imperial-class Star Destroyer Vengeance was Jarek's first personal ship. Here I consider it necessary to make a brief digression and recall that the Dark Jedi did not object to having non-human races under his command. Jarek himself was not entirely human, belonging to the race known as the Miraluka. Specifically, the captain of his first Star Destroyer was none other than Thrawn, who was not an admiral at that time. Jarek significantly contributed to Thrawn's rapid career advancement. The Imperial-class Star Destroyer Vengeance participated in the events on Sulon, which led to the Empire gaining full control over the planet. The ship was destroyed sometime later during an attack by artificially created monsters. Jarek barely managed to save the onboard computer. Later, the computer was installed on his second personal Star Destroyer, which was named the Vengeance II. But even then, Jarek's ambitions could not be satisfied with a mere Star Destroyer. He desired to have his own enormous, unique warship with firepower surpassing that of ordinary Imperial-class Star Destroyers. No other ships would suffice for him. The new ship was launched even before the Battle of Endor. Receiving the first ship of the new class as a gift from the Emperor, Jarek parted with his old Star Destroyer without regret, transferring it to the Death Squadron. This happened several months before the Battle of Hoth. Along with the new ship under Jarek's command came a small squadron which included Imperial-class Star Destroyers, Nebulon B escort frigates, and CR-90 corvettes. The squadron was named the Vengeance. Do not confuse this squadron with the similarly named large operational fleet commanded by Admiral Sen, which was also fighting in the Aram sector during this period. Jarek's squadron became a formidable military force. The Emperor assigned the squadron to carry out certain special assignments that could not be entrusted to the regular fleet. These assignments usually required both secrecy and immense firepower, as well as knowledge of the Force. The Vengeance became the headquarters and true home for a group of Dark Jedi, personally selected by Jarek. The Vengeance was used by Jarek in the search and capture of the Jedi Quran and the small group of rebels under his command. After this, the squadron began searching for the legendary location, the Valley of the Jedi. It was located on the planet Ruusan, and 1,000 years ago had been the site of a grand battle between the Jedi and the Sith. The last battle of the new Sith Wars. The mental bomb deployed by the Sith at the end of the battle led to the simultaneous death of thousands on both sides. Because of this, the Force energy in the valley was so immense that it was perceptible even to ordinary mortals without the gift of the Force. And those initially sensitive to the Force, upon visiting the source in the valley, could become truly powerful by immersing themselves in its energies. By seizing control of the valley, Jarek hoped to significantly increase his personal power as well as the power of his allies, his Dark Jedi. And having acquired the Force power comparable to Palpatine, he planned to become the new Emperor. However, fate was unkind to the Dark Jedi. Kyle Katarn first tracked down and killed all of Jarek's disciples, and then battled and defeated the would-be Emperor himself, engaging him in a lightsaber duel amidst the ruins of the valley. After Jarek's death, the fate of the ship and the entire squadron remains unknown. Most likely, Sisko, commanding the squadron, led it to the Battle of Biss, a path known to him, where he joined the forces of the reborn Emperor. This is suggested by the presence in the Emperor's fleet of a ship with a silhouette similar to the Vengeance, although it could have been another similar type battleship, as there is evidence that ships of this class, named the Vengeance in honor of Jarek's ship, were mass-produced at the shipyards of the core worlds for the reborn Emperor's fleet. In 10 ABY they were used in a grand military campaign against the New Republic, which I have mentioned several times, and which nearly led to the destruction of the young rebel state. A total of at least 3 Vengeance-class super battleships were built. One of them, named the Javelin, after the Emperor's death, was used by one of the leaders of the remnants for war against another such remnant. During the hunt for Ginge, the Javelin dreadnought perished under a barrage of torpedoes launched by the mobile battle station, the Torpedo Sphere. Palpatine understood that a great threat was nearing his state. He might not have known exactly, but surely suspected about the world ships by the Vong and their massive living warships. The Death Stars, armed with axial super lasers, were conceived to counter them. The super lasers were tested on numerous experimental platforms, with smaller versions trialed on ships. One day, scientists wondered why build an enormous round ship when a large number of ships carrying a smaller version of a super laser could be made. Let the cannon be smaller, and besides it, the ship would carry almost no other armaments. One such project was overseen by Admiral Victor Strang. Victor had a favorite brainchild named Strang, the experimental ship the Conqueror. It was created based on the hull of an ordinary Imperial-class star destroyer. But rebel saboteurs blew up the experimental vessel from within. This happened a year ABY, and it happened in orbit around Mustafar. Naturally, the Conqueror was not the only ship of this class. Similar attempts to build such ships were made and fulfilled many millennia before Palpatine's birth and his galactic empire. And in the early years of the Empire itself, a similar ship already existed, called Twilight. Its operating principle is like that of the experimental harrowers from Star Wars: The Old Republic. The ship is mentioned in the series of novellas Star Wars: The Last of the Jedi. Apparently, the project was simply abandoned, and Twilight left behind. The enlightened minds conveyed their vision to Palpatine, and he ordered the development of 2 types of super battleships, carriers of super lasers, similar to those of the Death Star, but smaller in size. The wishes of the Galactic Overlord ultimately materialized in the form of 6 ships, 2 superstar destroyers of the Eclipse class and 4 of the Sovereign class.